Welcome to the React Show. I'm Thomas with my host, Austin. We're with Owl Creek, an high performance React consultancy, here to tell you why you should not use Material UI React components. Right, Austin?
Yes, we both have some experience using this library and have definitely run into some more painful points in the recent future, and it would be good to talk about some of those. I need to get it off my chest.
Yeah, so we're just starting up this podcast. You can watch us on YouTube, and we're working on getting set up on all of your other favorite streaming and podcast services. But yeah, we have a lot of experience with React and uh, components and web development and a lot of opinions. So yeah, let's get into it. So Austin, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Material UI?
Um, well, I do have to say some nice things. I think Google made a really nice design platform. I like how accessibility is kind of a focus, like a main focus for them, like creating like properly fleshed out web applications. Then you have like that's just the design aspect, right? But I think what we're talking about today is the Material UI React library, the component library and framework.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think of that, the first thing that comes to mind is all the hack fixes we had to implement on the new date and date range and date time pickers at one of our clients, and how much fun and completely inconsistent that experience was as we went through it.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a mess. Although I have to come in here and say I'm not actually a fan of the material design philosophy. I think definitely disagree there. I think it's nice to have a consistent design, but I've never been on the material boat per se. But that's kind of a different topic we'll have to talk about. But
Oh no, I feel the same. It feels like a case of Stockholm syndrome to a degree. I don't really I've never used it personally. I don't like how specifically Google the design is. And we just happen to be using it at this client, so I like kind of was like, well, I have to like learn to love what I have, and maybe I'm just really like have a bad case of Stockholm syndrome at this point. But I think we're both breaking free of it, and that's the what we have to share today.
yeah, yeah, agreed. So yeah, I could talk about. I think one of the things that I find to that I really don't like about Material UI components is the theming and styling. It feels not very comprehensive. So like it's not if you want to theme something, it's really awkward, and a lot of times you can't theme specifically the thing you want to theme. And the other side of it is, I really like using style props for styling because I feel like in large projects in the long run they're the best way to sort of tie styling to a specific use case and not have it bleed over into other things, like SAS or CSS or whatever. It's like it's really easy to keep things together. Um, Material UI is super limiting on that. They basically only allow all the style props on a box component. Whereas like another library I like to use for components called Chakra UI, um, they have all the components compose their like sort of high level box component. So you can uh, use your same style props on basically everything where it makes sense. And it's just super clean and straightforward and nice. I get really frustrated in Material UI because I'm like, oh, this thing is obviously being rendered as a div. Why can't I, just pass this, style prop for making it a flex box or something. No, instead I have to like put it inside a box, or else I have to like use class name and pass in, my styles that way. So it might depend on your style. Like maybe if you like putting everything in a separate style file, maybe it's perfectly fine. But for me, I find it really annoying.
No, I agree. Material UI, it's been interesting using. Like I had to uh, like start working with it a lot faster than I could learn it. So it was kind of like learning as I went through. And so they have those JSS styles, right? Which I really am not a fan of because one, like in our project right now, the one we're like that we're using it primarily in, um, based on Create React app, it does not like out of the box support live reloading on JSS styles, and the
Oh,
documentation for how to set that up is really uh, incomplete, and it's like a lot of opinions and GitHub issues that people are like, oh, this worked or this worked, and it's really slowed down my development speed. That's the
yes.
first thing. But how you also mentioned this being boxed in by having to use box, or there's you like have to commit to using JSS styles to do everything the way that you select things within the components if you want to like they seem to offer a big lack of customization, and like you get an input field for example, and say you have like five different inputs that your designer has worked on. It's kind of a lengthier process to create like these class name conditional uh, like adding in conditional class JSS styles, and then also the whole thing to like properly do it, you have these like override files for the JSS styles, which are not connected to, or at least it doesn't seem to me that they're not connected to the theming framework that is within your whole app. They seem to be like the overrides are outside of they're like a configuration. So it's like it wasn't really intuitive to have this like, oh, I can really easily customize and edit everything I want. It seemed rather fragmented and not like intuitive to me.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Very unintuitive, very fragmented. And I I can't believe I forgot about the JSS styling reload issue. That is by far the thing I dislike the most about it. And people are like there are solutions, but it feels so like such a large corporate, Google type thing where for them they probably have a solution and it works for them because they have the engineers and the time to deal with such a thing. But like it's a real pain for people that just want to use it and not deal with trying to configure things or read confusing documentation or whatever. Like I really I hate that so much. It's like it should just work. And to provide such a large popular library like that where it doesn't just work is really frustrating.
Well, I mean, when I was noticing that, I mean, depending on your computer speed, I work remotely, and I currently work off of a little smaller laptop because I like it being able to fit in my day pack. And I don't have as much RAM as a like a dude that has his battle station set up. So like my reload time can be like 5 to 10 seconds depending on like the changes needing to be compiled, and that adds up massively over time. Like I will find myself not saving stuff on purpose so that the reload doesn't kick in, and also the amount of time I spent like a day or two like testing out 3 to 5 different ways that people had made the live reloading work for them, and I was not able to reproduce anything workable for our project. So it just feels like there's a lot going on that is not like when something like that doesn't work in the library, it makes you wonder about the fragility of the library as a whole, especially with these other, like the fragmented theming and like the boxing in of your capabilities. There are just a lot of red flags that will prevent me from ever using Material UI in my personal projects or future client ones.
Yeah, I agree. It feels to me, I think in general that it's it's sort of something developed by a not not a committee and not a corporation, but sort of a combination of both, where like there's a lot of ideas in it, and it has a lot of different features, that people probably asked for, but there was no single entity making sure that everything was consistent and made sense. It just seems like people were like, here's this big long checklist of features we want to have in this component library, go build it. And then that's what happened. It just doesn't feel designed really, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it feels engineered to. It feels like they were probably working on a project in React and kind of live porting over all the stuff in a way that made sense for their use case, which then, I mean, you can't blame them because as they started to grow as a library, they started to have to support it, and the things that they maybe wish they had done differently, they just couldn't get to it with their free model, which is why we're now at where we're at with the some of these more advanced components they're implementing, where they've switched to a paid model. And that's where it's just like making sure you like know what you're getting into before you get into it is important, because I mean the reality is just because there's some open source like library and it has some community maintenance doesn't mean that anyone is obligated to do what you think should be done with it, and you're stuck with to be part of the community, and it comes with a lot of responsibility. Like we've been doing these hot fixes or patches for the date pickers, right? And it's like, could we like do we want to develop and put time into like merging these hot fixes into Material UI, or we're just too busy where we have to focus on getting our stuff out and we're not even confident in what we've implemented.
Yeah. To be clear for the people listening, the date picker and date range picker at least was not included originally in Material UI. And so we were using by far the most popular third party library. And that might have been fine, except what happened was they are basically getting rolled into the new paid version of Material UI, and they basically abandoned the version that we were using.
In
And
alpha.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, in a sense, it's our fault for using a date range picker library that wasn't quite ready yet. But at the same time, there weren't really any alternatives. So
Well,
it
it's not my fault or your fault.
yeah.
It's the people who run this
Right, right.
project.
So it's
Just
a
need to.
situation we're in, but it's also very frustrating. It just seems to be the sort of the attitude of the community there is that it's fine and all, but I definitely don't agree. So I'm ready to move on here. So now I'm thinking about the other thing that I don't like about Material UI, which is form components. You basically have to use controlled form components, which I find is really annoying. I'm like, either integrate a form management library, so that we can just use the form components naturally without writing a bunch of boilerplate code, or don't force us to, use specific ways of implementing whatever these form management libraries are. I'm like, either do one or the other. They seem to have done this weird, like, half middle ground thing that is really frustrating for me to work with.
People who are opinionated about forms in React, right? So then predecessors can make uninformed choices about bringing in other libraries to handle form flow, and then you have these two libraries that are like kind of not working perfectly together, that are also still iterating, and then you have to try to create a third implementation of your own to like bridge the thing, and discovering best practices for that. So just like making the whole thing that I've been left with this is like making sure I know what I'm getting into with any dependency. I'm like very dependency skeptic now, because these things have added a lot of pain and time to our development process that maybe could have been avoided had someone thought about it earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like regarding MUI and forms and actually React component libraries in general, I think it makes a lot of sense to bundle a complete solution. What I see happening is the libraries basically don't, they're like, oh, we don't want to, include this whatever third party, React hook form or whatever it might be for, or, what was the other, there's another really popular one that's slipping my mind, but yeah, so they don't want to include one of those, but at the same time, I think that just creates a lot of extra duplicate work for whoever is using the component library. There are definitely ways that you could construct your library so that you have the base components which don't rely on any sort of form integration, but then you can like have a library as part of your component set that will provide all the rest of it. So you can just have a form component and drop your form elements in there and just have it all magically work. Like, I don't see any reason why you can't do that. And I personally think that'd be way better because, like Austin's saying, it's annoying to have to evaluate all these dependencies and they can change. Like, if it all comes together, but in a separate and composable way so that you don't have to use it if you don't want to, but you can include it and easily use it if you do want to. I think that's really the best way to do it. I really, and this is something that it's not like MUI is getting wrong by itself. I haven't seen a great example of this anywhere yet, but I think something I'd really like to see.
Well, I mean, the whole thing, I don't like complaining. I don't think it's very productive because my next thing makes me want to complain. But just like I think it's a product of our whole the JavaScript ecosystem in 2021. We have a bunch of people who do programming beyond full time, where it's like they are literally, they may even have USB plugs or whatever the new uh, adapters are, like plugged right into their neck. That's how like intense these people are, and they're driving a lot of these libraries that and frameworks that we use, and everyone has their opinions, and they're constantly changing, and there's so many of us that like everyone's trying, like we saw it with like when Redux was becoming a standard, and like how everyone's like, check out this new state management library that is under 1 kilobyte, and it does all of this. This is what you should use from now on, right? And it's like there's no. I feel like we're moving away from standardization like all the time, instead of like finding out like how to actually improve things. We're trying to flaunt cool, crazy new ideas of how to do things instead of just trying to actually get work done, you know?
Yeah. I I have an opinion about this. So um I think there are, yeah, JavaScript is I, I'll start over. So the JavaScript ecosystem I think is heavily dominated by corporate and like sort of influencer methodologies. I think compared to other ecosystems that I've worked in, the Lisp community, and C, which have corporate influences and they have some of those things. It definitely isn't dominated by it. So instead, you end up with like basically a standard that people work around. And what I see in the JavaScript community is um, companies like Facebook and Google or whoever releasing things, and those things are made for them and as part of their brand. They're not a part of the larger community. And I see people trying to replicate that aren't those big companies. So they come out with a new component library or whatever, and they try to make it into a business, which is fine and all. But I think a lot of them then miss out on the larger community aspect of developing something that is maybe more for the long term and more well thought out. Instead, it seems like, oh, let's quickly build something and start selling it, and you end up with a really, I think, fragmented and poorly designed ecosystem.
Yeah, it's like I think what you're saying is like a lot of JavaScript is built by, like, the stuff we're using are built by disruptive companies, and their disruptive ideologies are good because they've pushed a lot of growth in technology in general and pushing a lot of innovation, but that it's like because that is the standard, there is no standard, right? The innovation and disruption is the standard, which leads to a shaky base. But that's where I mean, React may not be perfect, but I do like how React has been, like how it's shifted, especially with the latest two main releases, where like they're working on making everything backwards compatible so that you can just start like implementing new things to kind of figure out what a standard will be. I think it's just going to be. Also, JavaScript is quite new in terms of like there's so many people coming into it, and it hasn't, like, it's constantly evolving, that there we're just in a turbulent time with it where we have to be those people who make the standards in a way.
Yeah, I don't know. I look at, like, say, React, which is, it's not a new thing. It's not innovation. It's just something that a large corporation made popular. Like, it's just functional reactive programming in a component style, which is not theoretically a new thing, but it wasn't really popular in web development before then, mostly because it probably couldn't be because of performance. But I don't know. To me, I find it kind of annoying. It's like a corporation taking ideas that exist and creating something that works for a large corporation, and then everybody else follows along. And I'm not saying that I necessarily think React is bad or I disagree with it or anything. I think it has a lot going for it, but that's the sort of idea and feeling I get is taking a lot of things that are solid and then applying and maybe corporate's not even the right word, a just like large team, situation. Like you're building something in a company like that, totally different than what 99% of people are building things for. Yet we end up using their technology everywhere.
Well, it makes me think about like like what is web design and what is web development in general. Like when you think about developing a website, you immediately are like, okay, like look on any website, there's a header with a logo with links to the left or the right, depending on how rebellious they are with their design standards. And then you have a body, and then you have a footer. And it's like we operate within these boxes completely. And like what you're saying with React is like we're operating within their box of how they've developed or what they perceive like best practices are, and we're just kind of going along with it, because otherwise if you're not learning the next bleeding edge stuff, you'll be out of a job pretty soon.
Yeah.
That's it's kind of a cutthroat, like we're in a tunnel, and it's like if you don't like stay in the tunnel, you're going to get ground up against the side and just left as a smear and be forgotten. And that's just, I feel like how humanity's kind of moving in general. We're like in this huge acceleration, and it has its benefits and it has its drawbacks, right? but I think we'll get there.
Yeah, I think this ties in actually to our MUI discussion, bringing it back around. Should you use Material UI? And I would say maybe. I said no earlier, but the reality is I'm also using React, and I use React not because I think it's the best technology, but it's used by a lot of people. Same with Material UI, and that has benefits. There are a lot of Material UI components. There are a lot of third-party components. There's a lot of documentation. So there are cases when it makes sense. Do I think that we can do better, and do I think there's better alternatives? Yes. Do I think it's always the wrong choice? I won't answer that, but
Yeah, it's definitely a sticky situation, but I think the main thing that we wanted to walk away with was like what are those better alternatives? Not necessarily in terms of like what is a better library to use, but more about paradigms of like better development. And that's like mostly it seemed to come down to standardization, but the ability to use like be flexible within like a higher standard that makes sense in terms of best practices ultimately, like, and figuring out what best practices means is quite a subject itself, right? What else are like the main takeaways of like what you think you've learned and like
yeah.
where we need to go?
Yeah, I mean, this comes down to a lot of my philosophies on programming design in general, but consistency, composability, uh, good documentation, and I think to me also, we live in a community of people. And so I think it's really valuable to be a part of that community. So even though that's not really a design thing per se, it has a big impact on the design. So those are things that I would really look for going forward is, something designed around those philosophies. I think it'll be it has a potential to be really good.
Well, I mean, that pretty much wraps up everything I had to say about Material UI. I mean, I'm sure some things will trigger me in the future and I'll be like, "Oh, I wish I mentioned them on the podcast." But I feel like this chat has been cathartic in that we now have some ideas of how to move forward in a better way for
Yeah.
all of JavaScript and programming kind.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure, go on and on about different things about it, but that's probably not useful at this point. Yeah, so I think we'll start wrapping up the show here. It's been fun hanging out with you, Austin, and I hope with everyone else listening. We'd love to hear what you say. You can find us at owlcreek.studio or in the comment section, wherever you feel like. We're still working on getting everything set up, and so if there's something you'd like or whatever, let us know as well. But yeah, that's all I have. Anything you add, Austin?
Yeah, just get in touch with us on the website or in the comments below on the podcast or the video and let us know what you think about what we've said and what your opinions are. We would love to foster discussion and not just be listened at. So please get in touch and we hope to hear from you soon.
Yeah, definitely. Let us know. Should you use Material UI? We would like to know. I mean, any opinion you have is a great one. So, yeah, I think that's where we'll end things here. And once again, you can find us at owlcreek.studio. This is